There is a specific comfort in placing a new paperback on a growing stack of unread titles. In a piece on the brain chemistry behind this habit, Michelle Spear, The Conversation, explains how buying a book triggers anticipation for future quiet. Then, Rachel Noorda, Associate Professor of Publishing, Portland State University, observes how Gen Z uses physical books to step away from screens and find community. What emerges from reading these two together is a picture of the printed book as something beyond just text. A simple bound stack of paper becomes both a private promise of rest and a public way to unplug. A stack of unread books on the nightstand usually looks like a failure of discipline. But in a late July essay, Michelle Spear, The Conversation, breaks down the neuroscience behind those towering piles. Notice how she links the modern dopamine response of buying a new novel back to early humans seeking shelter before a storm. That quiet optimism of an unread paperback actually serves a biological purpose. The brain is enjoying a reward before the cover even opens.
At busy times, I find I simply cannot read as much as I would like to. Life has a habit of filling every available hour with work, meetings, emails, chores, errands, and deadlines. Standing in one of my natural habitats, a bookshop, it is frustrating to see so many things I want to read while knowing I do not have the time. My usual consolation is to buy the book anyway and let a small, satisfying pile build up, looking ahead to the next quieter stretch when I might finally open them. It is oddly satisfying. Some might call this clutter. The Japanese have a far more elegant word for it, tsundoku. The term describes the habit of acquiring books and allowing them to accumulate unread. It combines the idea of stacking things up, tsunde, leaving something for later, oku, and reading, doku. The result is a concept that captures the quiet optimism of a pile of books. Far from being a sign of being time poor or lacking in discipline, tsundoku may reveal something surprisingly important about how the brain responds to anticipation. Dopamine effect. When we encounter something that promises enjoyment or discovery, the brain's reward system becomes active. One important pathway runs from the ventral tegmental area, a dopamine-producing region in the midbrain involved in motivation, to the nucleus accumbens, a structure that helps generate feelings of reward. Dopamine is often described as a pleasure chemical, but that is too simple. One of its key roles is helping the brain identify opportunities worth pursuing. Rather than rewarding us only after something beneficial has happened, the brain often rewards us in advance, encouraging behavior that is likely to prove valuable. From an evolutionary perspective, this makes sense.
Our ancestors benefited from seeking out food before they were hungry, shelter before a storm arrived, and useful knowledge before they needed it. A brain that could anticipate future rewards had a clear advantage over one that responded only to immediate needs. This means dopamine responds not only to rewards themselves, but also to the expectation of reward. The anticipation of a pleasurable experience can activate reward pathways long before the experience takes place. An unread book is a good example. It may remain closed for weeks or months, but the brain has already recognized its potential value, enjoying the prospect before the first page has been turned. The hippocampus, a structure deep within the brain, best known for its role in memory, also plays an important part. While we often think of the hippocampus as helping us remember the past, it is equally important for imagining the future. The same neural machinery that allows us to reconstruct previous experiences helps us construct future ones. When you picture yourself finally reading that book on a summer holiday, during a long train journey, or curled up on the sofa on a rainy afternoon, the hippocampus begins to assemble that future experience. It binds together fragments of previous experiences, stored across the brain: the warmth of sunshine, the smell of coffee, the sound of turning pages, the comfort of your favourite chair, into a coherent mental scene. In effect, the brain uses memories of the past to rehearse pleasures that have yet to happen. Contributing to well-being. This ability may be more important than we realise. Psychologists increasingly recognize positive anticipation as a contributor to well-being.
Looking forward to enjoyable experiences can improve mood, increase motivation, and provide a buffer against everyday stress. In some circumstances, the anticipation of an event can be almost as rewarding as the event itself. This may explain why a pile of unread books feels so different from a pile of unanswered emails. Both represent things waiting to be done, yet the difference lies in how the brain interprets them. Unanswered emails are future obligations, whereas unread books are future rewards. It is perhaps no coincidence that this behavior feels strongest in bookshops rather than online. Physical browsing engages the brain more fully, drawing on sensory, spatial, and reward systems that make discovery feel richer and more memorable. For example, the distinctive, slightly sweet scent of paper and ink is detected by the olfactory system and routed directly to regions involved in memory and emotion, including the hippocampus and amygdala. Long before a book is read, the experience of finding it is already becoming associated with pleasure. So perhaps tsundoku may reflect one of the brain's most remarkable abilities, the capacity to derive genuine pleasure from experiences that have not yet happened. Michelle Spear is Professor of Anatomy, University of Bristol. This article first appeared on The Conversation.
Michelle Spear leaves the listener looking at a bedside table piled with unread paperbacks. Instead of a sign of poor discipline, that stack acts as a biological reward. The brain is simply releasing chemicals in anticipation of a quiet Sunday afternoon. What jumps out turning to Rachel Noorda is how she takes that exact same stack of paper and looks at what it does in the present tense. Both writers treat a physical book as an object that performs a job long before anyone actually reads the words inside. But where Spear focuses on the private comfort of a future escape, Noorda points out how younger readers use print books as an active shield right now. For a generation raised entirely online, a physical book is appealing precisely because it cannot ping or track its owner. It operates as a deliberate choice to disconnect. Read alongside Spear, Noorda's data changes the shape of that unread pile. Buying a physical book starts to look like it does double duty, acting as a private promise of future rest and a highly visible way to silence a phone today.
A trove of recent articles bemoan the collapse in recreational reading among younger Americans, with COVID-related reading declines, artificial intelligence, and social media often described as causes. But as the authors of How Gen Z Discover and Consume Books, we think many claims about Gen Z's reading behaviors miss the mark. Some long-standing, influential studies aren't designed to capture how Gen Z often reads, multimodally, bouncing between print, ebook, and audiobook for the same book, and on web platforms such as Wattpad, Webtoon, Kindle Unlimited, DC Universe Infinite, and Marvel Comics Online. In fact, according to our 2025 data, a growing proportion of Gen Z, 66%, is identifying as readers, up 14 percentage points from 2022. In the previous 12 months, 65% of Gen Z read at least one print book, up from 59% in 2022. These findings roughly correspond with those of the Pew Research Center for the general population across all ages. In other words, Gen Z shows us that reading isn't dying, it's changing. A post-digital generation of readers. Gen Z is the first generation to grow up with internet access from an early age. Kids born from 1997 to 2012 came of age during what researchers describe as the post-digital condition, where the option to be online is constantly and pervasively available. Nowadays, no matter your age, engaging with printed books and other physical media, vinyl records, film cameras, DVDs, represents a deliberate choice rather than the only way to access media. To Gen Z, physical books carry a different meaning than they do for older generations. A longing for digital detox is a part of why print books are Gen Z's top preferred reading format, according to our data. Perhaps that's because printed books don't ping or track you. They look great when posted on Instagram or in Book Talk, TikTok's influential online reading community. You can loan books or give them as gifts, and used books bear the traces of other humans. You could argue that these physical qualities actually make books more alluring than they were in the days before the internet and social media. Across 3 nationally representative surveys, conducted in 2020, 2022, and 2025, we collected data about a wide swath of Gen Z's reading behavior. It ranged from reading text messages, game chats, and emails to reading printed books, manga, and fan fiction. We asked respondents about book engagement, which gave them permission to include reading that isn't intended to be finished, such as cookbooks and travel guides. We also asked them questions about their uses of social media, AI, and libraries. In 2025, Gen Zers visited bookstores and public libraries more than they did in 2022. About 36% of Gen Zers said they found a book through a librarian, up from 15% in 2022. We also asked about their experiences of loneliness, with 85% saying they wanted to find another place to relax outside their home. Gen Zers who didn't visit libraries had higher loneliness scores than those who did. Nearly 1/3 bought a book in a physical bookstore, which was their preferred place to find new books, ahead of Amazon. The market appears to be responding. The American Booksellers Association notes a 70% increase in independent bookstores in the past 5 years. In 2026 alone, Barnes & Noble plans to open 60 new stores across the U.S. Post-digital doesn't mean post-literate. Current methods to measure recreational reading aren't capturing data that reveals the full scope of how Gen Z reads. In a 2025 journal article that describes a decline in recreational reading over 2 decades, one of the co-authors, Jill Sunk, calls an annual 3% drop in the time that Americans spend reading as not just a small dip, it's a sustained, steady decline. This loss, she adds, is significant and deeply concerning. The study's authors, however, used an imperfect tool to analyze this decline, the American Time Use Survey. That survey records respondents' activities over one 24-hour diary day. The survey's definition of reading includes time spent reading printed books or magazines, reading on a Kindle or other e-reader, and listening to audiobooks. But it doesn't capture platform-based reading, or the book-related activities that happen online, reading and writing fan fiction, book talk and bookstagram, and reading or writing online reviews for Goodreads. These activities are known as post-digital reading practices, and they're almost never addressed in reading surveys. In her August 2026 cover story, The End of Reading is Here, Atlantic staff writer Rose Horowitz goes further, arguing that the U.S. has become post-literate. Horowitz focuses on one very specific form of literacy, sustained close reading of complex literary texts. Throughout the essay, she treats this ability as encompassing all forms of literacy. When she points to a study of students who struggled to interpret the opening pages of Charles Dickens' Bleak House, she concludes that many didn't even know how to go about figuring out what they didn't understand, or they didn't bother. But literacy researchers have long argued that literacy involves far more than reading novels or parsing Victorian prose. It includes the ability to interpret, evaluate, and create meaning across a range of texts, media, and social contexts. Make it a party. Identifying as a reader used to mean sitting alone with a book. That is less true for Gen Z than any previous generation. Gen Zers are more likely to experience reading as a social activity. The growing popularity of silent reading parties, where groups of people come together to read quietly and independently, suggests that Gen Zers enjoy finding community around books, even as they immerse themselves in a largely solitary act. We also note how some young people are bridging the distance between story worlds and real life by participating in literary cosplaying, in which readers dress up as characters from their favorite books and gather at conventions or themed events. Then there's book excerpt aesthetics, a social media trend in which readers post memorable passages and quotations from books. That's all on top of annual book festivals across the U.S. that bring together readers of all ages. The 2025 Portland Book Festival, headlined by Romantasy author Rebecca Yarros, sold out for the first time ever. Reading is certainly changing, but it's far from dead. And with Gen Zers still eager to see themselves as readers who discover, discuss, and share books with one another, we think the future for bookworms is bright.
What lingers is the image of unread paperbacks on a nightstand, and how the actual words printed inside almost seem beside the point. A bound block of paper becomes a quiet anchor. It offers a hit of anticipation just sitting there, promising a slow afternoon that might never arrive. At a cafe, it acts as a physical shield against a glowing phone screen. The question left to sit with is this: if a physical book does so much work just by existing in a room, does it actually matter if the cover ever gets opened?